My new iPad. But which iPad do you choose? Well, today I'm going to help you make that decision. So we're going to start here with the iPad Air. Now the reason I'm starting with the iPad Air is because even though it's one of Apple's older iPads, and you might say, well, who's going to want it? It's been discontinued and all that. The reason I'm starting with the iPad Air is because it's still okay. The iPad Air runs iOS 11, not the fastest, admittedly. If it's an argument of speed, then it's not fast. It runs iOS 11 though, okay. It tries to run iOS 11. The iPad Air does slide over but not split screen, and it has the Apple A7 chip, and you can probably find it for about £200. And it is going to get you most of the stuff done that you want to do. It just has a severe lack of new hardware, I guess. So if you want the iPad Air, then like I said, you're going to have to get it used. Apple doesn't make this anymore, but it is a good iPad to go for. If you want something a bit more basic, don't need much processing power, and you're happy with whatever you've got. So next I'm going to talk to you about the iPad Mini 2. Now the iPad Mini 2 also comes with the A7 chip, 7.9 inch screen, so it's a smaller version instead of the 9.7 inch iPad Air. So it is smaller, and it has pretty much overall the same design, the same processor, a tiny bit slower. The A7 in the iPad Air is slightly overclocked to 1.4 GHz as opposed to the normal 1.3 GHz of the A7. So it is overclocked a bit, but the iPad Mini runs at normal speed with standard graphics. It doesn't have that slightly extra powered up graphics either. They both have a gigabyte of RAM, and both run iOS 11, but probably won't run iOS 12. So there is something to think about. The fact that your iPad may not run iOS 12 if you pick one of these iPads, or the one that I'm going to go on to next. The iPad Mini 3. Now the reason I'm going on to the iPad Mini 3 next is because they have similar hardware. The iPad Mini 3 also shares the A7 processor, exactly the same design, but adds Touch ID and a gold colour. Other than that, you're getting no new features. You're getting the same A7 chip, the same design, the same 1GB of RAM, so you're probably better off just sticking to a Mini 2 or Mini 3. Make up your mind. The Mini 3 didn't really last as long. The Mini 2 only went sort of March of this year, so it has gone. But make up your mind and decide from there. Next, I'm going to go on to the iPad Mini 4. Now, I'm not just doing iPad Minis here. The reason I'm going on to the iPad Mini 4 is because it's not quite as powerful. Released a year after the iPad Air 2, which we'll talk about next, the iPad Mini 4 has the Apple A8 processor, follows the same design as the iPad Air 2, with that 6.1mm design. Looks pretty decent, removes the mute switch. And yeah, it has the standard A8 chip, like you find in the iPhone 6. No A8X, like we'll talk about in the next iPad Air 2. No A8X, anything like that. You don't get any of that. But you do, like I said, get the standard A8 chip. Slightly more advanced graphics, also only 1GB of RAM. Or is it 2 actually? The Mini 4 maybe 2. 1 or 2 gigabytes of RAM, we'll say. And it is okay. It will probably get iOS 12 and then be stopped. It's not a champ on iOS 11, I'm not going to lie. But it's not a disaster either. It's just, you know, if you want to go with that iPad, then go with the iPad. If you don't, then don't go with the iPad. It's sort of a choice that only you can make, really. But yeah, it's okay. That's sort of the iPad in the middle, I guess. They still sell it for £419 with 128GB. But if you want it used or anything, then feel free to go used. Argos also sells less capacities at the minute. Not because Apple are making them, because they've obviously still got stock left over. So that's the iPad Mini 4 for you. Next, the iPad Air 2. Now we're back into 9.7-inch iPad territory here. And the 9.7-inch iPad Air 2 features the A8X processor, a laminated display, that's 6.1mm design, 2GB of RAM, a triple-core processor clocked at 1.5 GHz, and a standard display for an iPad, 2048x1536 pixels. So, the iPad Air 2 is running the A8X chip. It runs iOS 11, and I'm going to say this, it runs iOS 11 mostly like a champ. It may sort of lag and stutter in some places, but it runs iOS 11 like a champ. There is no point saying that it doesn't when it's fully capable of running iOS 11 like a champ. So yes, you do get the odd stutter and lag. It's rare. Apps open pretty quick. Everything's smooth, and it will be getting iOS 12. Now, after iOS 12, I'm not sure with this one, because it's actually quite a bit powerful, more powerful than the iPhone 6, which shares the A8 processor, and probably won't get anything after iOS 12. Well, I don't know. We'll see. I don't think it'll go on after iOS 12, but at the same time, I see that sort of position where it could. So we'll see what happens with Apple and all their decisions and that. Next, wait for it, the iPad 5, iPad 9.7, iPad 2017, what are you supposed to call it? The iPad, as Apple simply called it. But then again, in some places it says iPad 5th generation. Anyway, this iPad, which I actually happen to have and use as my main tablet, has a Apple A9 CPU clocked at 1.84 GHz. It's only dual core, so one core's gone. The graphics are slightly less powerful than the one in the A8X. It has 2 GB of RAM, same cameras, the 8 megapixel and 1.2 megapixel as the Air 2. The same display but not laminated, so it's like 25% brighter, and it's noticeably brighter than every other iPad. It has the original iPad Air 1 design. Still no mute switch though. When you say original iPad Air 1 design, I don't mean the mute switch just hops back over to iPad land. No. That's not back. You're still getting no mute switch, but you are getting the original iPad Air design, meaning it's a bit heavier, a bit thicker, and it's got no laminated display over the iPad Air 2. Now, this is kind of a powerhouse as well. They both got fingerprint readers, obviously, Touch ID. These are both powerhouses, but this one obviously is just going to be supported longer into the future because of its A9 chip. So we'll see how that goes and what Apple does. But your A9 chip is going to look good well into the future. iOS 12 may see a slight performance drop, but I'm not sure. We'll see what happens with that. Next, we come on to the iPad Pros. Now, the iPad Pro 9.7 is discontinued. The iPad Pro 9.7 is good, I guess, for people that want to do art, photography and that. It has the Apple Pencil as well, so you can go with that. But at the same time, why not just go for the iPad Pro 10.5? There's going to be a massive difference, but if you want to buy an iPad with the latest chipset, then the iPad Pro 10.5 might be the one for you. Or iPad Pro 12.9-inch second generation. Apple does make quite a few iPads, and it can be confusing. The oldest one they sell is the iPad Mini 4, then going up to the iPad, then we have the iPad Pros. Now, the iPad Pros all sort of come into their own line. So if you want extreme power, photography and iPhone 7 cameras, then the iPad Pro 10.5 is for you, with its A10X Fusion chip. So, the iPad buying guide for 2017/2018, I mean, really late 2017, but this is relevant into most of 2018 as of iOS 11 at least, until Apple changes its iPad lineup. Really, I've listed out sort of the specs and that. They're okay, and I mean, from the specs and that, from what I've listed out, you're better off just going for the iPad that best suits you, judging by what I've said. For me, it's the iPad, or iPad 9.7, or iPad 5th gen, whatever you want to call it, the iPad 2017. For me, it's that one that suits me best. So it's really up to you. Only the individual has that choice. But anyway, guys, if this iPad buying guide has helped you, then let me know. Obviously, leave a thumbs up, just show the love, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.